Hey, Erev Tov, everyone. It's been a while. We had a nice summer, all kinds of positive things and also not so positive things, but here we are. And we actually started this topic, are the detailed halachot too detailed? Does it enhance spirituality, religiosity, morality, and everything else? Or does it become too detailed and too difficult and so on? And we discussed, just to get us back into the topic, we discussed a little bit that the first time we started discussing this is before getting into the details, the whole idea of halakha. What are the positive aspects of halakha that it creates? I'm just going to go through a list without going into details. It turns us into a tzibur, into a public. I told the story about, the child who tells his mother that he's the best kid in the choir because he sings faster than everyone else. That's not what we're looking for. We're trying to be a tzibur, a community, a people, a nation, worshiping Hashem together. So if each one does his thing, that can be very beautiful individualistically, maybe yes, maybe no. But if we want to be a nation and give light, to emanate light from ourselves as a nation, we have to have something communal, and the halakha creates a framework for that. We discussed halakha as an expression of commitment. I'm not just, happy to be connected. I'm committed, like between human beings, husband and wife, or other relationships. Halakha is an expression of commitment. It's not only idea, it's action. It's an expression of how we live our lives, not just that we have thoughts and ideas and ideals, but that we actually carry out and live according to our ideals. It has to do with guf uneshama, body and soul. Torah, we are human beings in this world, body, and we also have a neshama, a soul. We're spiritual creatures. So the Torah has to be expressed in a physical way and in a spiritual way. So on the one hand, we have to have actions that we do physically, and those are halachot. Of course, we're looking for the soul in those actions, and we don't want to just have actions that are void of any spirituality, of any soul, but we also have to have the actions. It also enables us to pass on a tradition. It's very difficult to pass on a tradition of ideas without actions. Actions, chagim, daily prayer, kashrut, all kinds of things enable us to have a framework which helps us pass on tradition from generation to generation. And all of these considerations, of course, are important. All this is, another point I would say is even a little bit of restriction. We have to learn, a person has to learn to use restriction in order to bring out his abilities. We don't bring out our best if we're always just spontaneous. By restricting ourselves and guiding ourselves in specific actions and specific directions, we enhance, we deepen our abilities. So halakha helps us put restrictions and guidance and work in a certain direction. It is an expression of devotion, of love. I don't only do what is fun for me, I do what is good for someone else. In the same way that this can be true between individuals, this is true between us and Hashem, us and the world, and it creates processes through history. I would mention an example from this week's Parashat Shavua, the opening of the Parasha. The beginning of this week's Parasha is the halakha of Eshet Yifat Toar, of a soldier who goes to war, and he sees a beautiful woman and he takes her as a captive and so on. And the Torah restricts what he can do, but doesn't forbid him from doing it. And the rabbis say that this halakha is kind of a compromise with Yetzer Hara. There's nothing ideal about it. It's putting in place restrictions, but taking into account Yetzer Hara. Now, I would say in the 21st century, absolutely not. Anytime you mention the halakha of Eshet Yifat Toar, it's important to be clear. We are talking about something in the past, not something that we want to be put into action today. No way, absolutely not. But the fact that our society has reached the point where we say this is absolutely not relevant today might be a result of halakha creating a process, a certain relative process and gradual process by putting partial restrictions in place in the past and helping us move forward. So by not totally restricting on the one hand, and by restricting and not leaving permissiveness on the other hand, maybe the rabbis, the Torah shebichtav, and the rabbis in the Torah shebal peh, in the written Torah and the oral Torah, enabled us to create a certain process that has helped us grow to this day. And all of these are examples and points about how halakha, how having practical guides of action in halakha can be valuable. This is all an introduction to discussing how detailed the halachot should be. Because all of what we said, we can identify it, we can love it, we can be extremely happy about it, and at the same time, we can have questions about how detailed it has to be. It's one thing to keep kashrut. I'll tell you, we were on a 12-day trip out of Israel in Europe in August, and we in northern Italy, and Italy is very, very weak on kashrut, very weak. You have a few places where there are kosher restaurants, but if you're not in those areas, it's very, very difficult to find. We found very little of anything kosher. Wasn't so difficult for us because we rent apartments, went to an apartment hotel, rented an apartment, and kosher a few pots and cook for ourselves. So it's not a big deal to eat. Questions come up when you're out. You want to buy a bag of potato chips, have some cheese, have something else. All these are the issues. And you can be very kind of general and say, I'm not eating any non-kosher meat. I'm not going to any non-kosher restaurant. A lot of things I'm not doing, but there are a lot of things I would eat. And I'm certainly not transgressing Torah laws or anything like that. And yet the details of Ilchot Kashrut do create serious restrictions. We actually, on our family WhatsApp group, we had interesting discussions of this while we were on our trip, and one of our children was with the spouse's family on another trip. So we had all kinds of family discussions about being lenient, more lenient in Chutz La'aretz than in Israel, or dafka because in Chutz La'aretz you're tempted to eat other things, so you should be more strict, more stringent, and more strict than in Israel. It was an interesting discussion, but it just raises the question, because if we were less particular about the details, it would be much easier for us. And we wouldn't be transgressing kashrut. We would not be, we wouldn't be eating treif. He wouldn't be eating cooked food from non-kosher places or anything of the kind, but we could be more lenient and have a little bit more fun. So the question, that brings up the question of, are the details too detailed? Is it possible that there's a situation that deters people? That, they want to keep religion, they want to identify with the framework of halakha, and yet the details are too details and too that they have a feeling that somebody is holding them too tight, holding them at the back of the neck. Talk about a yoke, okay? Accepting the halakha as Or Malchut Shamayim, the yoke of Hashem upon us. A yoke is okay, but if the yoke is too heavy, if the yoke is choking you, if the yoke is causing pain, it's too much. So are the details, how do we think about these issues of the halakha? Okay, so I'd like to show a few sources on this issue. So one moment, let me find the first source that I want to discuss. Okay. Here we are. Okay, see it? Okay, so here are two psukim from the book of Mishlei. I believe in English it's called Proverbs. Am I right? Okay. Okay, so one of the psukim is very well known. It's the pasuk of Shema beni musar avicha v'al titosh torat imecha. Again, how do you pronounce the word? Hearken
Hearken.
Hearken.
Hearken, my son, to the, thank you. Hearken, my son, to the discipline of your father, and do not forsake the instruction of your mother, for they are a wreath of grace for your head and a necklace for your neck. So the Midrash that I don't have in English takes this pasuk, you see it in Hebrew here, and it takes the pasuk in Hebrew, Kilivyat chenem leroshecha. You take the words, here, these words, Kilivyat chenem leroshecha, a wreath of grace. It's like a necklace. It's like a jewel that you're wearing. So you can take the Torah, the traditions that we get from our fathers and mothers, and you can take them as a jewel. And the Midrash brings two examples. I'm going to skip one of them and go to the second one, and says, what does it mean? So Rabbi Pinchas Bar Chama over here says, wherever you go, the mitzvot accompany you. And he gives examples. You build a new home, and you make a ma'akeh, a banister, right? So you don't fall off. You make a door, you put on
Railing.
Railing,
right. Railing, thank you. You have a door, you put up a mezuzah. You wear clothing, you have shatnez. You go to shave, there are rules about how to shave and how not to shave. You have peyot, we all have payas, right? We do. The halachah is not that you have to have long curly payas, just not allowed to shave 360 degrees all around and leave without any payot. You go to plow in the field, and you're not allowed to plow with a mule and a donkey together. You go to plant, and you're not allowed to plant kilayim, different kinds of seeds together. You sow the fields. You harvest or reap your crop, and you forget you forget a sheaf in the field. You leave it there for the needy. And even if you're just walking on your way and you happen to see a nest and you want to take the mother bird or the eggs, and you're not allowed to take both together, you have to send the mother bird away and keep the eggs for yourself. So you're just walking along the way, and wow, Hashem drops another mitzvah in your lap. Now think of that reality that the Midrash is describing. You could have two different reactions to it. You could have someone reacting the way the Midrash is saying, oh, that's so beautiful. You're giving me a ring over here, a necklace over there, an earring over here. Wow, you're surrounding me with blessings from Hashem. Wherever I turn, there's a mitzvah. You're adding to my zchuyot. You're giving me opportunities to connect to Hashem. Beautiful. And then I could see someone else saying, come on, give me a break. You're following me around wherever I go. There's nothing I can do that you're not going to tell me do it this way, do it that way. I build a home, I have to do this. I put up a door, I have to do that. I go to plant, I go to sow the fields, I reap I harvest. Come on, let me breathe. I'm choking, not leaving me any space to live independently. So what the point I'd like to make about this is, part of what halakha means in our lives is dependent upon how we take it. Someone can say something to you in a positive way, and you take it negatively. Someone can say something to you in a, I don't know, not necessarily negative. They don't mean to insult you, but they say something to you and you can take it negatively. A lot of how we react to things in life is in our hands. So you take the Torah and you see the details and you see how it's with you in all kinds of places. You can say, you're chasing me around. I need a little space to breathe. Leave me alone. Or you can say, thank you. Wow, thank you. I have an opportunity here. I have an opportunity there. I'm so grateful that I have so many mitzvot surrounding me. So here's one thought about the details of how much are we able to take them in a way of a blessing, in a way of an opportunity, and not in a way of something that is breathing down my back and not leaving me any independent space. If you would like to react to this, please, now is a good time.
Sounds okay.
Okay, so this doesn't mean that the question is not a question. It doesn't mean that it always, works itself out comfortably. But at least to a certain extent, it is in our hands, and we can work on it, even if I'm not perfect, and even if it's not always natural and spontaneous. But it's something that I can also think about in a way of how do I turn it into more of a blessing in my life. Okay, so that's one point. Okay. Here, I'm going to go to another point. Interesting, the end of Masechet Makot, of one of the tractates in the Mishnah. Okay, so the Mishnah is going to say the following. Here we go. There we are. This is the end of the Mishnah, Masechet Makot. Makot, in Hebrew terminology today, means beating someone up, fighting, boxing, makah, hitting someone. The word makah here does not mean that. It is the halachah in the Torah when a person is punished by being, what's the word in English?
For what?
For malkot.
Oh, beatings. He gets lashes.
Lashes, yes, thank you. Like with a whip or something.
Yeah.
Again, something which would be very difficult for us to think of carrying out today. By the way, you should know, I don't know if you have ever seen this, one of the aspects of the punishments in the Torah, this is a side point, one of the ideas, one of the goals of punishment in the Torah is atonement. Not necessarily punishment in a negative sense, but a way for a person to atone for something is through punishment to enable him to achieve forgiveness. So by being given lashes, something that someone did wrong is atoned for, is forgiven. There are people today who on Erev Yom Kippur, Tet Tishrei, on the day of Erev Yom Kippur,
they hit
lash
themselves.
one another. You can, if you go outside the men's mikveh on Erev Yom Kippur, you can see people who are going to mikveh. They're also standing there. Is there a word flagging in English? Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Flagellating.
Yeah, flagging. That's it.
It's
They hit themselves. They hit themselves.
Yes, Eliezer?
Yeah, I was saying flagellation, but yeah.
Okay. And you see them, of course, they're not doing it in the full form of the Torah, which is much more painful, but they kind of flag one another with something to have a certain element or a certain level of lashes so that they will achieve atonement. And in the 16th century, after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, there was a gathering of Kabbalists in Tzfat. One of them was Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and or Rabbi Shlomo Halevi Alkavetz, who wrote Lechadodi, and a really serious, unique group of Kabbalists in Tzfat in the 16th century. And one of the things they tried to do is they had an initiative for renewing the Sanhedrin. They wanted to reconstruct the Sanhedrin and create a new Sanhedrin. And one of the reasons was because in the time of the Inquisition and things like that, people did not die to keep the Torah. They did not accept death, being killed so that they wouldn't transgress the prohibitions of the Torah. So they kept mitzvot in secret and things like that, but they performed all kinds of averot. And so they wanted to achieve atonement, so they wanted to create a Sanhedrin that would give them the lashes. That was one of the reasons. But in any case, This is Masechet Makot. All that was, I'm sorry, too long of a side track. And now back to Masechet Makot. The end of the Mishnah in Masechet Makot says the following. This is a pasuk in Vaikra. You shall keep my statutes and my ordinances, which if a man do, he shall live by them, right? V'chai bahem. The Torah says you keep the mitzvot, v'chai bahem, which means, and just before that, the Torah had restrictions. And so the Mishnah said, the Torah says restrictions, and then it says when you keep my ordinances, you live by them, which means that one who desists from transgressing is granted reward like one who performs a precept, meaning you restrain from an Aveira, you restrain from something which the Torah forbids, and you get kind of reward like someone who performs a positive mitzvah. Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi says, behold, it says only be steadfast in not eating the blood when you're allowed to perform shechita and eat the meat of an animal. And then in Parashat Achrimot, in Sefer Vaikra over there, the Torah discusses about in the desert what you had to do in order to eat meat. But when you eat the meat, you have to be absolutely clear about not eating the blood. And then, so the Mishnah says, you want to eat blood? Do you have a craving for blood? You know, the Torah is telling you, don't eat the blood. Why? It's such a great, you have a very powerful Yetzer Hara to eat blood. Is it very difficult for you to overcome that Yetzer Hara and not eat the blood? So the Mishnah says, now if in the case of blood for which man's soul has a loathing, anyone who refrains from, therefrom receives reward, how much more in regard to robbery and incest, for which man's soul has a craving and longing, shall one who refrains therefrom acquire merit for himself and for generations and generations to come, to the end of all generations. So we have different kinds of mitzvot in the Torah, and some of them are not so difficult to perform. Don't eat blood. Okay, it's not so difficult. It's not something that I'm so, you know, I have a craving for blood, and yet the Torah promises a reward. So how much more so for things that are difficult for us to do, and there's a reward for them. So what's the point I'm trying to make here? It's also to say that sure, there are difficult things in performing the halakha, in keeping within halakha and the details of halakha. Of course, there are difficult aspects to it. But any performance of mitzvah, any acceptance of that yoke which I mentioned before, of Hashem, and remaining within halachic frameworks, if it's difficult, it has a reward that comes with it. If you like, you can think of the reward as in the sense of you're given a certain prize. I would like to think about it in what I think is a deeper or more intrinsic way. There's something that grows within you. You grow spiritually, you grow in your personality, you reach a higher level in some way in life, sometimes a way that I can analyze and be aware of, and sometimes something that is within me and I'm not even aware of it. So even when it's difficult and it's frustrating, and sometimes it feels like it's too much, when you when you work on it, and bring yourself to be able to accept and act within those restraints of the halakha, you are growing in some way and achieving some kind of reward in whatever way you like to think of reward. And again, you're more than welcome to participate. Tova, bevakasha.
Yes, I just want to mention that it's whatever it says in the Torah not to do, somebody was doing it. And if we know that today in Africa, they have a tribe that lives in the desert and it drinks the milk. It actually cuts the animal, the cow. They have cows and they let blood and they drink it. So it's not, so it's something that people did and do. So that's why the Torah says not to do that. So we have to remember that.
Okay, thank you. It's an interesting point. And when it comes to the question of now for me, okay, I am instructed not to do something. So first of all, these things, like the example that you're giving, these are things that can change in different times, in different surroundings. I mean, I know people around us, nations around us, who they don't salt the meat like we do to extract all the blood, but they're not sitting there looking for the blood and trying to drink the blood or anything like that. So that's not something that's in the background of our performance of halakha right now. So then I would say there are two kinds of mitzvot. There are mitzvot, it might even be the same mitzvah in different historical times, creates a different kind of pressure for us. So sometimes it might be very easy for us to keep because everyone in the world loathes this thing today. So it's easier for us to keep it. And then there can be a different mitzvah or a different time or place in history where it's difficult for us to keep a mitzvah because the pressure around us is pulling us not to accept the restriction of the halakha. So if we're promised a reward even when, or again, whatever level of your understanding, whatever way of your understanding of reward is, if we're told there's a reward for performing a halakha or a mitzvah, even when we're not interested in it, so much so, kal v'chomer, when we perform a difficult mitzvah. So what I'm trying to say is, give ourselves koach from that. Where it's difficult, okay, remind yourself that I understand that it's difficult. Where it's difficult, it means I'm growing. It means I'm gaining something here, and not just, not just flowing in the flow of the river. I'm swimming against the current, and my muscles are strengthening. My spiritual muscles, my spiritual neshama is strengthening because I'm swimming against the current. So there's something I'm growing or gaining by doing that. Trying to give us motivation to do that. Eliezer.
Well, since you mentioned flagellation, I think that this is one of the things probably that we should have grown out of. Just as like giving the death penalty, it's something that's never done, and by human beings, because if you look at history, especially in Christianity, but I'm afraid possibly partially it might even be in Judaism also, but Rasputin was the most notorious. He was, this monk in Russia who was the master of flagellation, self-flagellation. And he started a whole movement about that, which pretty much destroyed Russia. And also you, every once in a while you read about flagellation. And I think something that really we have to just say is past.
But this is self-inflicted. Flagellation is self-inflicted.
Well, it's both.
Not.
It's both. You can flagellate each other also.
Yeah. But I'm saying, well, what I said about Yom Kippur is not Rasputin. It's much much lighter. It's symbolic.
Yeah.
What I said about the 16th century was looking for the full. They were seeking to perform the full halakha of Malkot, and yes, I think it would not be acceptable today, and we would have to make a kind of a rabbinic decree which would say not now. We don't do that now. As like we do in halakha sometimes, that the rabbis can say, okay, hora'at sha'ah, we're not doing that now. I don't know. We'll see in 1,000 years, maybe something will change. I don't know. But right now, we're not doing that. But still, I think we can learn from it that there is an aspect, again, like we have mitzvot, for instance, like I said about Eshet Yefat Toar, or in the next halakha in the parasha is about Ben Sorer u'Moreh, that already the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin brings a Tanaic source that says that it's drosh v'kabel sachar. It's something that we should learn something from it, but not to perform it. So I'm saying, okay, let's accept what you're saying, Eliezer, no flagellation. We're not going to carry that out right now, but we can learn from it that it achieves a certain kind of atonement. When I do something that's difficult, that's even painful for me, in a certain way that I accept it, I take it upon myself, it helps me in some way. Don't only think of it as something which is painful and difficult, and somebody's inflicting pain. Hashem is inflicting difficulty, is inflicting pain upon me, is putting a burden, a yoke, a painful yoke on me, and he's overdoing it. Hashem is overdoing it. Or one of the questions that I remember was raised when we started discussing this, maybe it's 2 months ago, was, okay, but it's a rabbinic source. A lot of the details of halakha, they're not in the written Torah. They're not in the Torah shebichtav. They are either interpretation or rabbinic decrees. So, so somebody's inflicting me with these difficulties. So we will discuss that as well, the rabbis and the rabbinic sources and things like that. But right now, I'm saying even if it is difficult and painful, there's also an aspect of growth and gain to think of when you think of it. I'm not pressing or promoting a renewal of flagellation right now.
So
David, in any case. Vakasha, Michael.
well, you keep saying right now, and that makes me nervous.
Maybe it'll come.
Not in 2 weeks when you come back. Don't
Yeah,
worry.
we were actually looking forward to coming back until.
Don't worry, no flagellation.
So
That's why I said not in Kinol David. If you come to Kinol David, you'll be okay.
okay, well, but what if you sang out of tune? I don't know. So I'm trying to wrap my head around a couple of things. It sounds like every day that we go through the day and we do not get a tattoo, we get a benefit from that, just because that's derisive. You don't do that. Are we to think that following the mitzvot, you're mainly doing it because of what you're going to get out of it? That seems a little narcissistic to me. What do you think?
I like your question. I don't think it's for us. It depends what you mean for us. Again, if you think of the reward in a sense of a prize, so I would consider it a little bit narcissistic or childish, to use a different term. And the Torah, and I believe the Torah uses that, because I think the Torah, when it says something, it's speaking on a few levels, and it's speaking to children, and it's speaking to adults on different philosophical and spiritual levels. And that's why I stress, on the one hand, the words of reward which appear in the Mishnah, and at the same time, I stress that I don't want to think of reward as a prize, but of growth. And I think growth is not narcissistic, but it's also, I agree with you, we also have to accept some things when I don't identify with it, and I don't see how I'm growing from it. And I do it because I accept the yoke when it's difficult, and it's a yoke. Yes, I accept it. But at the same time, I do believe that even this aspect of us accepting the yoke is something that makes me, pushes me in some way of progress in my personality. Adarabah, not in the opposite of narcissism. I'm not thinking about what's comfortable for me, what's good for me, what's pleasant for me. I'm growing my ability to do things because of other reasons, not for me, not because of my pleasure and comfort, which is a certain form of growth.
I think that all the laws that we have are basically essential to create a society that functions. Because if you don't have laws, people would be killing each other. If I want something, I'll go and take it. If I'm not afraid of, or if I don't know that it's wrong. In other words, people have to be taught. And I think that in Judaism, we are given, a list of things that we can do and we cannot do. And this helps us to maintain a more or less an orderly society. And I think it's very important. The laws may be difficult sometimes, not so convenient, but yet if you think about it, they train our minds to think in a certain way, and that gives us the ability to be considerate of others, to share these things. If we don't have this, we can look at other societies and we will see that there's a difference between their attitude to life and ours. Even if you look at the Muslims and our neighbors and cousins, you know, their view of life is different than ours, and death is different than ours.
I'm going to take what you're saying, Tova, and I'll go use it in the next stage. I hope we have time for it now, and it won't be
Okay.
in a long time. But I'm going to mention or connect that to something we're planning on doing very soon. But Michael, was there another thought that you wanted to share?
Well, I think what Tova is saying, I agree with 100%, that I've always thought that the wisdom of the Torah is there to try and civilize the world.
Right.
And
Exactly.
that's what is meant by us being a light unto the nations. We're supposed to, you know, distribute the knowledge and demonstrate what it looks like to live that way. And of course, everybody blames us for that because they don't want to be told what to do, including a lot of Jews today. So I guess the question that you started with is it too much? Is it too hard? Are there too many restrictions?
Right.
And it seems sometimes to me that the hardest restrictions are the ones that certain people in our society put on other Jews, where it's never enough. You're not strict enough, and there's always layer on layer on layer, and that may be part of where some of the negative connotation comes from sometimes.
So is it possible that there's truth to that not only today it's being done, but that it's been done for a certain number of hundreds of years, and so there are too many layers of restriction upon restriction that the Torah could come out to the world in a very positive and shining way, without some of the layers of restrictions that have been put one on top of the other in the past? Is it possible that we can turn back and take off some of those layers and still be fulfilling the Torah in a very enlightened way? And maybe it would even be better because more people would be able to connect to it. And let me put the question out also with saying, is it possible that a rabbi will support that? Okay. In other words, it's absolutely fine to raise the question. I'm never against asking questions, but is it a possibility, a halachic possibility, and not just a question in a shiur, that we are going to turn back and peel off some of the layers of restrictions that have been put on throughout generations? And I'm going to get to that question, maybe not right now, but I'm putting that question out here so that we don't forget to come back to it.
There are different minhagim in different places, so that contradict or totally are not the same. So that we don't have the same Torah, we do, but there's an interpretation in different countries were different. So it doesn't mean
but you're talking about minhagim. I'm talking
minhagim,
about halachot.
right? But the
halachot.
Halachot is halacha is the same, but it comes to interpretation sometimes. But there are certain
levels, like you say, there are certain levels that we all accept.
Right.
Is it possible that even within that framework that has been accepted by everyone, there are some things that we can say it's gone too far? We can take off a few layers.
Probably.
Without taking off the Torah or the original rabbinic decrees, just the certain amount of layers that have been put on.
Probably.
More and more.
Because some halakha developed out of necessity. So
okay,
it is
but I'm asking the question, is it possible that some of the things that have been accepted by everyone for hundreds of years, beyond minhagim and halachic disagreements, that some of those can actually be peeled off and we can go make certain things more lenient? Is it a halachic option?
So now you're talking about kitniot. That's a whole different.
That's a custom, exactly.
Kitniot is not totally universally
It's
accepted
a
by Jews. I'm
custom.
talking things
That's
that
what
are
he was talking about.
universally
He's talking about real
accepted by
stuff.
all Jews.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the
So
question
I'd like to
is
show
going to be,
you.
the question is going to be who has the authority, and how will that be passed around?
Okay, but again, that's I think a second stage question. First
Right.
stage question is it acceptable? Because I'm sure you will find God-fearing Jews and learned rabbis who will say that it's totally impossible. Not only don't even ask the question, but even if you've already asked the question, absolutely not. What's been accepted is halakha. Don't start playing games with us. Don't start taking off things. And I'm asking, is it a legitimate option? Of course, there will be a question of authority, but is it a legitimate option that it might happen, and how do we think about it? So I'm going to reach that point. But before we reach that point, I'd still like to make to quote something else. Okay, there are a few other things on the way, and here's another thing in the Torah. We just read this last Shabbat.
What about the postpone? What about the postpone?
No. We just asked this. We just read this last Shabbat in the beginning of Parashat Shoftim about halachot that you come to your local rabbi and he doesn't know the answer, or the local rabbis disagree about the answer, and so on. And the Torah says you rise and go up to the place of the Lord your God chooses, meaning to Yerushalayim, to Beit HaMikdash, and to the Sanhedrin. And then I'm skipping Pasuk 9, and going to Pasuk 10. You should do according to the word that they tell you, and so on. And of course, we have to do what they say, and you shall not divert from the word they tell you, either right or left. These are the Psukim we're familiar with. I'd like to focus on Pasuk 10, on Pasuk 9, that says that you come to the Leviim, Kohanim, and to the judge. In Hebrew, the words are Uvata el HaKohen ve'el HaShofet el HaKohanim HaLeviim ve'el HaShofet asher yeh bayamim hahem. And the question is, why does the Torah mention both Kohanim Leviim? Kohanim were from Shevet Levi, and judges. We're talking about the Sanhedrin. What difference does it make if the judges in the Sanhedrin, the Dayanim, are from Shevet Levi or not from Shevet Levi? What relevance does this have to accepting the decision of the Sanhedrin? Yes, Tova.
The Kohanim and Leviim is because there were Kohanim that were not Leviim, like Bnei David were Kohanim. In other words, it's a position.
But what is it relevant to judgment, to being a Dayan in Sanhedrin? Just say, come to the judge. Why does it have to mention Kohanim?
Because the Kohanim, they were the teachers. They were the teachers.
Okay, so generally, the answer that is common, the common answer, the answer that is given usually is the answer that you said, Tova. I find that in Torah Tmima, for instance, of Baruch Epstein. I'm sorry, Rav Yechiel Michael Epstein, his father. And it said because they're the Kohanim who did not have the regular professions. They were supposed to be servants in the Mikdash, busy with Kedusha, studying Torah, teaching Torah, as the prophet Malachi says, they are not only people, Kohanim in the full idea of the Torah. The Kohanim are not just the people who give Birkat Kohanim and have the first Aliyah. When you're reading the Torah, they're supposed to be people who are not working in the fields. They're not making parnasah by having a job. They are free to be busy with Kedusha, and therefore they are spread out within Am Yisrael to spread Kedusha, to strengthen Kedusha, to be a source of Torah and holiness within Am Yisrael. And therefore, naturally, in the Sanhedrin, there are Kohanim, but there are not only Kohanim, there can also be judges who are not Kohanim. That's one answer that is given. The Netziv Mivolozhin, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Volozhin in the 19th century in Lithuania. And Rav Kook studied in the yeshiva in Volozhin. and a Netziv was one of his rabbis, and Rav Kook always considered the Netziv as one of his teachers, one of his rabbis. And actually, the Netziv also had a very Zionistic approach, which is, it of course grew and enhanced with Rav Kook, but he took a lot of it from the Netziv. And what these two rabbis have to say about this is very interesting. I first studied it in learning of Kook's writings, and later on I learned that he took this from his rabbi, from the Netziv, which was interesting for me to work backwards in history and learn that Rav Kook learned this from his rabbi, the Netziv. And they say about this dual kind of dayan in the Sanhedrin that there are two kinds of halachot, two ways to reach a decision in questionable halachic matters. One is the way of the Kohen, and one is the way of the Shofet. What does that mean? One of the ways of reaching a decision is a more spiritual, general, abstract way. We have the Kohen Gadol has the Choshen, right? The breastplate with the stones of the 12 tribes. And there is such a thing that there is a certain question that has to be asked. And in the Choshen, you have the Urim v'Tumim, that there are instances described in the Tanakh where someone asked the Kohen a question and he got he got an answer in some prophetic way through the Choshen. The stones of the different tribes also had the names of the tribes upon them. And on the bottom it said, Shnei Masar Shivtei Yisrael. And so you had all the letters, and the letters would light up and give a certain answer to questions. When a king had, or a shofet in Sefer Shoftim, had to decide to go to war, not to go to war, he could go to the Kohen Gadol and ask a question, and the Urim v'Tumim in some kind of prophetic way, in a form of holiness, would give him an answer. So the Netziv and Rav Kook say that in the Sanhedrin you can have two kinds of judges. One of them is giving a more spiritual answer, saying, what is the halachic thing to do? He does not derive it from learning the Midrashei Halacha and the Mishnah and the Gemara and all the sources throughout the generations of going through all the details and inferring, reaching, A brings to B, brings to C, brings to D, brings to E, and the halachic answer is X. He does it in a more spiritual, abstract way, and he reaches a decision. And the other is the judges is a more intellectual form of, it's more mathematical. A leads to B, leads to C, and so on. You reach the halachic decision. The only form of psak halacha that we are familiar with for many hundreds of years is the second, is the judges, is the analytical. A leads to B, leads to C, and so on. But Rav Kook says you look in the sources and you'll see that there are also this other way of deriving practical decisions. I'll give you an example. There is a halacha in Masechet Rosh Hashanah that says that if you turn the shofar inside out and blow it, you're not yotze. Okay, it's good to mention this halacha. Rosh Hashanah is coming up. Ilana, you're on mute.
Turn the shofar inside out.
I'm sorry, you were still on mute at the beginning of the question.
How can you turn a shofar inside out?
Okay.
Doesn't
there
work
are
that
few
way.
interpretations of it. One of them is that you turn it around.
Around.
You blow from the wide part to the narrow part. Now, good luck, okay?
That doesn't
You
work either.
Number one, good luck getting the wider part into your mouth.
Yep.
Number two, good luck if you succeeded in doing that, getting any sound out of it that way.
Right.
I don't know, somebody succeeded in doing it. That's one option. Another option is the shofar can be changed. If you put it in hot water, it becomes like clay, it becomes flexible. And you can
Bend it a bit.
You can
Mold
make
it.
it a better shofar. And
Really?
you can turn it like a sleeve or a sock inside out.
Mhm.
And the Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah discusses these questions. What exactly is it saying? And in the Babylonian, in the Talmud Bavli, the Gemara says, what is the source in the Torah that we don't do this? That this is not acceptable. You're not Yotze if you do this. And the Gemara says, because we have a rule that V'ha'avarta shofar, one of the words the Torah uses for blowing shofar is leha'avir shofar, v'ha'avarta shofar. And the Gemara says, derech ha'avarato, the shofar has to be blown the way it grows on the rams, on the animal, meaning from the narrow to the wide and not from the wide to the narrow. And another in the Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem, in the Talmud of Eretz Yisrael, the Gemara says, because of the pasuk in Tehillim that says, Min ha'meitzar karati ya, anani b'merchav ya. I call out to Hashem from a place of kind of distress,
The merchav is rachav.
and to a place which is broad, meaning I'm experiencing an express of being in kind of restrained, being confined, being in tzarot, being in trouble, being something is pressuring me in a negative way. And Hashem took me out, and I am in a broad place, in a good place in my life, not physical, more spiritual or emotional. But the Gemara says you learn from that. The Yerushalmi says you learn from that we blow from the narrow part of the shofar to the wide part of the shofar and not the other way around, which is very weird. Now, the Bavli sounds like it's a drasha. It's not written there in the pasuk. The Yerushalmi is taking the idea of the pasuk, but it has nothing to do with shofar.
Right.
The pasuk in Tehillim is not about shofar. It's in Hallel. So there's which one is more original? There's a fascinating argument between some of the commentators on the Gemara, the Ritva, the Ravad. One of them says the Bavli is the real thing. This is the way we derive halachot through these drashot. The Yerushalmi is sweet. It's kind of a parable. It's like it's a drush, as we would call it today. It's a vort. Okay, it's not serious halacha. It's a Hasidic kind of addition to the halacha. The other one says the Yerushalmi is the real thing. This is what it's about. The Bavli wants to connect it to a pasuk in the written Torah, not in Tehillim, so it finds a connection to a pasuk in the Torah. So they're disagreeing about which is the stronger way to derive halachot from, from when you have a question, what's the halachic answer? How do you reach it? So Rav Kook is saying there is room in halacha to study, to take things in a way which is closer to the original idea. Shofar blowing on Rosh Hashanah is about entering into a place that's more narrow. I have to correct myself. I have to fix something. I have to not just be broad and happy and dancing and singing and spontaneous. I have to put a certain yoke upon myself and do something which is kind of a more narrow, straight, that's guiding me in a certain direction. It's less comfortable. But when I do that, I end up entering into something which is spiritually broader. So I'm thinking a spiritual way about what's the right practical way to carry out a certain mitzvah. How many of our mitzvot function in that way? How much of our performance of halachot and mitzvot works in a way of a close connection between the notion, the spiritual idea of the halacha, and how we carry it out? How much of our fulfillment of halachot and mitzvot has turned into a very detailed, in the beginning, when you went in from point 1 to point 2, there was a connection. But then it went from point 2 to 3, as I said before. There's a certain train of thought from A to B, to C to D. A to B was close. The idea of the original idea of the mitzvah, the spiritual idea of what the mitzvah is for, was there. When it went from B to C, it went a little farther to D to E to F to G to H. It's gotten so far away from the original idea of the mitzvah that I've lost connection between the detailed performance of the mitzvah to what the spiritual idea was.
Right. Yes.
So I'm bringing this thought of the Netziv and the Rav Kook to ask us the question of have we moved so far away from the original idea of the mitzvah that we've lost it? Maybe we should turn back and bring the halakha closer to the original idea of the mitzvah. Or maybe we're not allowed to do that. Or maybe we have to study the mitzvah deeper so we will see the connection to the spiritual idea of the mitzvah, even if we've gone from A, not only to B, to C, to D, to E, to F, to G. This is a question I'd like to discuss next time we get together.
Okay. Sounds good.
So
Michael.
one other question comes into my mind. Am I on? Yeah. If somebody's going to turn the shofar inside out and lose the benefit of that mitzvah, then I wonder if that's also analogous to people that will turn the Torah inside out to achieve a goal that's negative, because we see that.
Absolutely. The only question is when there are two people who disagree on what the Torah is saying, each one is convinced that he's the original Torah and the other one is turning it inside out. So again, we go back to the question of authority, of who's going to make the decisions. But yes, I would basically, yes, there are certain things that people do so-called in the name of the Torah, but is that what the Torah really meant? And it can be on the extreme far right from me or the extreme far left from me. Of course, I'm exactly in the right place, the right balance. Where I am is exactly the right balance, of course.
Yes.
Okay.
I say that cynically, of course, in case someone misunderstood that.
We understood.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
To be continued.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom, Tadarabah.
Laila Tov.